Andrea Molle is a professor of political science at Chapman University in Orange, California, and he is also a keen martial arts studies scholar, and I'm talking to him now. Andrea, how are you doing?
Pretty good, mate. How you doing?
I'm all right, yeah. I'm wearing my Chapman University t-shirt.
I see I got mine too. Look,
Yeah,
best
very.
buddies here now.
Yours is nicer than mine. I'll have to come back and buy a new one.
Oh, this was specially done for our institute, but I can get you one. I fetch you one, no worries. If you don't
So,
mind having the word economics on a t-shirt, I know that can be
oh,
embarrassing for some people.
okay, not my strong suit, but so yeah, so economics. So you're a political scientist. You work in the realm of numbers and statistics and
Yes.
data, but you also want to combine that, or you often do combine that with your research in and around martial arts. How does that fit together?
Well, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, more in general, from a research perspective, I think we're getting too concerned about this distinction between qualitative and quantitative, whatever you want to call it, and numbers versus other sort of research. I think that's preposterous. I think, of course, each one of us will have their strongest suit on research, but I think we should be able to, jump from one method to another or combine results, combine information. I think qualitative is absolutely important, even if I teach statistics and I do most of my work with numbers and equations and formulas. I
Mhm.
think all those things without the background, without the history, and without the cultural studies, without the qualitative interviewing, it's simple nothing. And especially in the martial arts,
Mm.
I
So
think
you, I
combining.
mean, I know that you have lots of different research interests and lots of different research projects on the go. So I guess, I mean, where did it start? When was the first time you decided you wanted to do this academically? You wanted to do it as a research project? Well, tell us about your first
Mhm.
connection with the academic stuff.
So it was my academically suicidal move after my PhD, I think. So I mean, my all my career was pretty boring and normal up to my PhD, and then I got interested in Japanese new religion when I was doing my PhD. So my thesis was actually about how some of these movements will spread in Europe in a completely different socioeconomic and cultural context. And so I had a chance to go to Japan and attend a few conferences. And here I met. It was an early morning in a conference in Sicily. I remember because I got hurt the night before. I walk into the restaurant to get my breakfast, and there was only two people, me and a Japanese researcher, and we start talking. And he said, "Well, um, I work for a research center in Nagoya that deals with religion and culture and lots of other things. And if you're looking for something else, just apply." And so I applied for JSPS, the Japanese Society for Promotion of Science Fellowship. I got it unexpectedly, and more than ever because my research idea was to investigate the spirituality within Japanese martial arts, but not really the how spiritual they are and blah blah blah, but mostly how the spirituality in martial arts is constructed by European and American practitioners, and also sold by some of the people that exported these arts in Europe in the first years, like 70s, around the 70s, or even before during World War II.
Mhm.
So I got accepted, and I spent 2 years working on this. Then when I came back initially to Europe and then to United States, they told me that's not really something that we do. And at that time, I didn't know you, man. I didn't know what you were going to do in Europe. Probably if I knew that, my life would change completely. I would apply for the UK or whatever.
Mhm.
But I got another scholarship in Texas, Baylor University, and I was free enough to keep doing my side work on martial arts. And coming here to Chapman,
Mhm.
I managed to convince some of my senior faculty to I told them, like, I'm still gonna do international relations and religion and conflict and all the things that are important
Yeah.
if you let me do this too. And they say, well, okay, I mean, it's your time if you can manage both. And, that's how I came back into this. And around the time that you were looking for an option for bringing the conference outside the UK and outside Europe, and
Yeah.
we all know how that goes, right?
Yeah, and then you said, why don't we have a conference in Chapman? And it sounded really interesting and exciting. And but people in North America seem to have struggled to kind of come out from the shadows when it comes to martial arts studies, right?
Yeah,
That
it's literally a coming out experience. It's just
yeah, it's a
just go
strange.
out and say, I'm doing this.
Yeah, and people. I mean, is it the case that the American university is so professionalized or so siloed, or I mean, what is it that makes people reluctant to kind of show their interests in martial arts as an academic field?
It is extremely silent. And I think, most people, including me, had this idea that the U.S. will just foster innovation and be very receptive on new things, but it's really not the case. At least in my neck of the hood, it's in the academia. From my experience, we have these disciplinary silos, and so if you're doing political science, you don't do sociology, okay? You don't do cultural studies. Unless you find yourself into one of those interdisciplinary areas, which are also structured in the academic discourse here, you really have a few options.
Mm,
And even more so within the discipline, you got to pick one team, and
mm,
it's excruciating anytime you want to do something that is different, that is innovative,
mm,
or expanding into an area. Most of the time that you spend is trying to rationalize to your own academic community why you're doing that. Even with my current book project, I had to kind of, you know, prove my department,
mm,
and I know that this is recorded, but it's not. I'm not offending anybody, but I have to prove my department, and because of my own interest, that I
mm,
was doing something that was anchored to classical political science.
mm,
It wasn't that hard because the nature of my project, but I have a very short leash, and I only have few options. So I don't enjoy the same freedom or liberty that you might have in Europe, and especially in the martial arts study, we're really you know backtracked here. We're really behind
Is
the
that
curve.
because of funding, so you need to justify your time and it needs to be paid for, or is it because you need to apply for grants and there are no grants that would welcome martial arts research? I mean, or is it because in America you have that tenure system where you're in a really precarious situation, so you have to toe the line and you have to jump through the hoops until you get that kind of holy grail of tenure?
Yeah, it's both. You touch on both nerves. The reward system within tenure is the reward and punishment system within tenure is so strict. It's really a narrow bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to jump, and it's like you have to jump. You have to do what you have to do to get to there, and then when you're off, you can do literally whatever you want. And that's also that component. The grant component is also there because of course, and the two are linked, because of course in the tenure they expect you to bring, especially in research university, to bring some grant in, and there's not a lot of grants that will be open to martial arts studies, again, unless you tie it up into some of those teams that they work on. So if you apply for Templeton Foundation, they have these big things about consciousness, or change in religion, or conflict, or terrorism. So it's all very compartmentalized.
Mm-hmm.
It's already written for you. That most of the time when you write a grant application, what you're trying to do is to check all the boxes they want you to check,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always not a box for martial arts.
Right.
Even though, I mean, at least politically, this is really important, at least
Yeah.
from my perspective.
So I think I can understand because I think I can understand something of how you've justified your current project, because your current project is a book on Krav Maga
Yeah.
and Israeli national and cultural identity. So I guess I
Hmm.
can see how you could persuade people of the cultural politics or the ideologies at play around that. Would that be right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That I was saying before, that wasn't a really hard sell. It was really easy for me to convince my colleagues that this is a book about the formation of Israeli identity and nationalism, and also the identity of the Jewish community in the diaspora. And what I'm looking specifically is the role that was played by Krav Maga, and which is, to me, is a very important role. And it's also, it's not unique because you can see the same dynamics and discourse, coming out in China at different times, and of course Ben Jenkins will be the expert here, or in Japan during the Meiji Restoration and the invention of Kendo, Sambo with Russia. So there's plenty of examples, of actual martial arts, like tradition already existent, or
Mm-hmm.
martial art tradition that were reinvented, or martial arts tradition that were resurrected. Look at Mexico and the formation of Mexican identity, this resurrection of reinvention of complete invention of martial art tradition, allegedly dating back from the Mayan or Incan Empire. So you have all these examples. It wasn't hard for me to say, okay, this has happened before, and I think that looking at the construction of the Jewish state, it's even more important because we can literally observe that process coming out of the 30s and the 40s, and so on and up. Now we can tie it up, which I did, to the securitization issue, and say how there's this idea that we always have to be safe, that we always have to be defended, and we always have to be proactive and learn things that will allow us to, or create things that will allow us to be safe,
Mm-hmm.
is tied up to Krav Maga, even outside the Jewish community. So one
Yeah,
thing that,
I was going to ask about that. I mean, we can talk about the history and the myths and the ideologies around Krav Maga with specific reference to different forms of Jewish identity. But what about kind of your average guy or girl, and she wants some self defense, and she heard about Krav Maga, and maybe we're in Paris or New York, or we're somewhere. uh, is that student going to be impacted or affected by a kind of Israeli cultural nationalism or a Jewish nationalism, or is that not how it works?
I know, I believe so. I mean, and again, you really are on point when you said that we can talk about how that plays out with the Jewish identity, and that's one conversation that we can have. It is really interesting. The other conversation that we can have, and we should have, is how the Israeli identity, which is different from the Jewish identity. How's the Israeli identity? And most importantly, the perception of certain tenets of Israeli identity plays out with practitioners that have no interest, they're not Jewish,
Mhm.
and maybe they have no interest whatsoever in Judaism as a religion or as a culture. Okay,
Mhm.
so one other thing that is always thrown around when we talk about Japanese martial arts or Chinese martial arts, people get interested in the culture, right? Or get interested in martial arts because they're interested or fascinated by the culture. So when I was studying my thing in Nagoya, one of the pathway to that is like, I'm reading manga. I was exposed to manga and Japanese cartoon when I was a kid, and I got obsessed by Japanese culture. And then, oh, here's the martial arts. I want to do it. Okay, I want to learn how to swing a sword. I want to learn how to throw people with judo. With Krav Maga, we don't really have that. Okay? People might have heard about Judaism, but for sure they have heard about Israeli and Israel. And there's this image of Israel being the master of security,
Yeah.
right? And so when you want to ring up your house, and or your place of work, who you gonna call? Like Ghostbusters reference here. Who you gonna call? You're gonna call the Israeli security company, right? Because that guy served in the Golani, which is like, okay, everybody pretty much served in the Golani. It's like a mandatory, not the Golani specifically, but everybody has done military service in Israel. But
Mhm.
no, this is like, oh, he's a former Israeli soldier.
Mhm.
Oh, well, I think he's serving the Mossad.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay, but that's the myth, the mythology of martial arts with Krav Maga is also tied to this idea that if you want to be safe, you got to talk to the Israelis.
So do we think that for people who are maybe interested in the status and work of martial arts, um, in a more general sense, or with specific reference to, say, not to Krav Maga, but maybe any other kind of martial art, the kind of martial art that seems trivial in a setting like like maybe you send your kids there or whatever. But if we look at Krav Maga and its relation to the Israeli state and maybe a sense of Jewish identity, and also the securitization of the self, the
Hmm.
responsibilization to, like, because it's the martial art that makes you go, well, what about the windows? What about the exits? What
Yep.
about not, what can you hear? It's not just about like counting to 10 in Japanese and doing this.
Yeah.
It, is there something that we can take from your studies of Krav Maga in this really, really intense kind of realm of security and conflict, and cast light on other martial practices, like maybe, I know you've done Aikido and Judo and things like that. Does it teach you anything about those arts as well?
I think at times it can teach you about how those arts were perceived in the past. And since you mentioned Aikido, of course, we go back to the 80s and the 90s and those horrible movies with Steven Seagal. There was this idea, of course, that you should learn Aikido because look at that guy in TV, what he's doing. Okay. This mediatized idea of how to protect yourself was really strong. And you go back to karate with Chuck Norris, or even Kung Fu with, the famous TV shows. So at times we can use this to sort of kind of cast some light onto other martial arts were perceived. Now I think it's hard to do that. So it's not portable to the realm of traditional martial arts, because nowadays we look at traditional martial arts in very different ways. And so it's all started with emphasis on their philosophical and pro-social behavior pedagogy, but it also tied in with a whole conversation about effectiveness. And so I'm talking about the MMA, and then when the MMA UFC came around and BJJ came around, and say like these arts are really not what you should be looking at to protect yourself. It's about other things. Those other things are wonderful,
Mhm.
but I don't think anybody that takes self-defense seriously now will look at Aikido or Mo Street Karate or
Mhm.
Taekwondo. They look at those legitimately for other reasons.
Mhm.
But for sure, we can look at MMA,
Mhm.
sort of applying the same lens that
Mhm.
you apply that you get from studying Krav Maga. Now, MMA is all sport too. There's a different component. It doesn't really overlap completely with this idea of self-defense and security. So there are, of course, other systems we can look at, but there is one side of that that is considered very effective, and the fact that it's MMA and BJJ are taught to police forces and military forces that also feed into that idea. But I think that with MMA, it's mostly the gladiatorial component that
Mhm.
fascinates people rather than the that what you say, like the securitization of the self. And
Yeah.
I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think in any martial arts, mixed martial art class, they'll teach you how many doors
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have in the
Yeah.
dojo. Where's the open window? Am I wearing a tie or not a tie? Close your eyes and tell me something about the Claire. So I think those things are pertains to the self-defense realm, and especially in these days in America, but in Europe too, to Krav Maga.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of, I mean, it wears the crown, doesn't it, of encompassing all areas. In a sense, there's a the older ideology of the kind, the kind of ideology that came through the kung fu television series, where you're meant to be pacifist but philosophical and very kind of zen and very, and that if you practiced kung fu or tai chi or something, therefore as a person you would be the philosophical, kind of wandering Taoist, yeah. But
mhm.
but nowadays, I mean, you might go down to your taekwondo class and you kick around for a few hours, or you might do a judo or something, and there's not the imperative to have the spatial awareness, the situational awareness, the street smarts that you need, that
Right.
will also teach. I guess to be Krav Maga, there must be a discourse around Krav Maga practitioners that you must also include situational, complex scenario training, as well as the MMA training of use all of your body as a weapon,
Right.
right? Yeah.
And there's also political discourse, and I'm really happy you brought that up, because there's of course the individual social component and the way the training is designed, but look at the history of the countries that produce this. So when judo or aikido, they're developed in a modern sense in a time where Japan was I'm not talking about the Meiji Restoration here, but talking about World War II. So after World War II, what was the idea? Okay, we're a peaceful nation, we're projecting soft power out, we're projecting cultural power, we sort of lead by example, like whether we are or not in our in our secret room that peaceful, we are projecting that kind of image. Same thing with China. We had the sleeping giant, right? It's okay, I control by soft power. I don't have to crush you with my army or anything. I don't have to defend from anybody because I'm fairly safe in the war system. If you look at Israel, this is a completely different game. And this is independent of which way you side within this whole messy thing that is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Yeah.
But the idea of Israel is that we're few, we're weak, nobody really likes us, we got to defend ourselves. We don't live in a healthy neighborhood here. We live in a very rough territory. We're taking whatever we can out of that. We're carving our nation. So we have to be aware of everything, assuming that everybody else is stronger than us. So that is the idea behind behind Krav Maga, and especially in would say in the more Israeli way of teaching it, this is very emphasized. Even the starting out of a weak position and being the weakest in the room is very emphasized. I mean, America is a little different. With Dan Levine, we brought Krav Maga in, literally pretty much one of the people that brought Krav Maga in the 90s in California and then the United States. Guy is massive guy, experienced in karate. So the Krav Maga in the United States is more physical. It is more aligned to the the foreign policy of the way, the posture of the United States. But Israeli Krav Maga itself, it's very aligned with the posture of the state of Israel, but Jewish
Okay,
state.
there's two questions that I want to ask. One is about your research methods like archives and approaches, but the other one is, I mean, Krav Maga is world famous. Uh, is there an equivalent like Palestinian martial art, or does it just not? If Israel, Palestine, and Krav Maga, what's on the other? Is there a symmetrical kind of opposite to it, or is it just a different universe, like discursively,
No,
got no
no,
visibility?
I don't think. I mean, to my knowledge, okay, and if everybody has an insight of a Palestinian martial art, please let me know. That will be super interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Exactly what you say, to put it into juxtaposition with the Israeli experience. But I don't think there is. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of so-called enemies of Israel, so like sworn enemy of the Jewish state, that are using Krav Maga.
Yes.
It was the official training art or training discipline in the ISIS or ISIL
Yeah.
uh, forces.
Okay.
Of course, the whole the Jewish dimensions that Israel you mentioned are sort of like epurated in a way. They're pushed away, and the only thing that is kept is the close combat, which is, by the way, is what Krav Maga means. It's a quarter combat. It's not any exoteric biblical label. It's like fighting close quarter, hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
So I think once you get rid of the Hebrew persona and the myth and the mythologies behind it that is very common in commercial Krav Maga or Israeli Krav Maga, then you can just use it. You don't need to create something that is your own thing.
So the other question then, so I mean, you're writing this book and you've been researching it for a while now,
Yeah.
and what are your sources? Are you reading kind of old Israeli archives, or are you reading English language archives, or where are
Yeah,
you?
no, I'm a mixed method. So I also have a quantitative component to that. I had a little survey online that I gave to practitioners, and mostly interested in Krav Maga as a cultural experience. And then, as you were saying, I'm looking into history books and old IDF documents. The IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces, to see how that Krav Maga was created.
Mhm.
You know, besides the mythology of Emil Lichtenfield's, creating it by his own genius and then give it as a gift to the world.
So what do you have to
Um,
say about that particular myth? I mean, how does it, when does it born, and who pushes that myth, and what would you prefer to see pushed?
so it's again, it's really interesting because we find the same dynamics in most martial arts, right? And you're the expert here. You wrote a book about these things. Uh, so I mean, the founder. Okay, Krav Maga needed a founder, as any other martial art, especially because it was sort of like commercialized in those years in which everybody expected Mr. Miyagi to their martial arts. We needed to find a founder, and so this guy Emil Lichtenfield, and I'm not downplaying his role in the development of Krav Maga, is the person that was taught and is still thought about as the inventor of
Mhm,
Krav Maga. And he, according to the mythical history, he is a Jew in Europe. In the 30s, is a very physically gifted person. He practiced wrestlings and boxing and also a little bit of judo. He competed in the Maccabi Games a few times, and during the Nazi occupation and expansion in Europe, he creates in his own town. He creates let's say, sort of vigilante groups to protect the Jewish community from the incursions of, Nazi supporters.
mhm,
And and before things get really bad in Europe, he decided to emigrate in what is soon to be Israel.
mhm,
And there he joined the Haganah, which is the precursor to the IDF. It's the Jewish militia
mhm,
in the area. And he started teaching that his method of self-defense to other people in the Haganah.
mhm,
Now, this is the official history. And then after the formation of the State of Israel, what happened? The IDF is created and he's offered a job, according to the myth, as the chief instructor of self-defense and hand-to-hand combat system
mhm,
to the IDF. And he develops his methods. It changes quite a bit. He has students. Some students go, some students stay. Then after he retires from the IDF, he creates an association to teach Krav Maga in Israel. So we're talking about like the 70s, 80s, that the
mhm,
period of time. And then in the 90s, it goes global. And I think the Ministry of Sport and Culture, they invited people from all over the world, from Jewish communities, sponsored by Jewish philanthropists and communities around, to expose them to this new Jewish way of defense. And that's kind of how it starts. With that part is true. So that's kind of how it starts. But what is not completely true, according to official documents and people in the I would say in the environment of Krav Maga, high instructors. And I'm not talking about just small potatoes here. That it's not really true that he invented anything. He brought something that he found. He kind of mixed things and he taught to the military his
mhm,
own methods. But Jewish in the Haganah, they already have from the past, from the British occupation, the Ottoman occupation. They had some ways to defend themselves, and
mhm,
the IDF took everything,
mhm,
and they started to rationalize
mhm,
that. Imi was the right person at the right time to make that happen in a more formal way,
mhm,
and it is credited for that,
mhm,
and it should be credited for that.
mhm,
Uh, what it shouldn't be assumed as the truth is, as is any martial arts, is that he invented something.
mhm.
He is the only one who came up with the idea. I mean, we did Ueshiba Morihei invented Aikido? Uh, I'm not sure he invented anything. He learned Daito Ryoki Jiu-Jitsu. He put stuff that he found interesting into that, and he
Mhm,
started his school. He called it Aikido. That's
mhm,
fine. He didn't invent it anything. But however, what happens is that in the practitioners, they are in the need of finding this messianic, say messianic figure to their discipline, is the one who gave birth to the discipline.
yeah.
So
So,
uh,
I mean, one thing that we talked a lot about before COVID-19 caused our countries to go into lockdown and our worlds to turn upside down in different ways was we were working on we were thinking about developing a project about self-defense discourses. I mean,
Yes.
you'd already done some fascinating research on different kinds of, again, vigilante groups in different
Mm.
communities. Is that something that went on pause for you because of the lockdown and you changed your attention to the pandemic, or is it something that you've mixed into the Krav Maga book?
Well, I mixed it in the Krav Maga book. I mean, I haven't forgotten about that, and I'm still up to do that work when we both have time. I think is still really interesting. Um, I use that in the book quite a lot. You know, this idea of securitizations and this new attention, new discovered attention to self defense, which is, you know, let me open like a little, you know, like sideways trajectories here. It's bizarre because if you look at the numbers, we are getting more and more safe in our cities. So you know, look at the crime numbers in the U.S. And of course, somebody may come up and say, "Well, but there's a problem with those stats because there's a high level of unreported assaults." Yeah, that's accounted for. But we see a you know a trend going down, so our cities are becoming more and more secure, or at least there are areas that are becoming less secure by the day, but for the most part majority of cities, a majority of our environment is becoming more secure from that perspective. But yet you see this increasingly higher attention to self-defense, so that went into the book.
Mhm.
And also went into the pandemic studies. Yes, I have the attention span of a 3 years old sometimes when it comes to research, and I get fascinated by the new things. And I think we were talking together, and I was also talking to Ben, to which I co-authored an article on COVID-19 spread in Italy.
Mhm.
We started thinking about, well, what is martial art doing?
Yeah.
What's happening to our classes, and what is going to happen, you know, the more we get into our feet deep into the pandemic, and what's going to happen after, you
Mhm.
know, assuming that we're getting a vaccine, assuming that we're getting out of the acute phase of the pandemic, what's going to happen
Mhm.
to our disciplines. And that's sort of something that I'm still discussing with Ben.
Yeah. So
If
what are your feelings about the future of martial arts practice, kind of maybe internationally over the next couple of years? Let's assume that maybe we don't get a vaccine
hmm,
immediately. I mean, or even if, I don't know, even if we do, it's still, there's shock waves that are going to ripple through things for a while. I mean, even in the best scenarios, what do you think is likely to happen to this world, martial arts world?
well, it's hard to tell. What Ben and I are seeing are different tendencies, and that's why we want to design sort of like a social experiment, or we want to design a research and collect data before it's too late. Because on the one hand, we're seeing a boom of some martial art classes. They discover the online instruction, and which was a taboo. You know, if you go back and look at 2 years ago, okay, and you go on a Facebook page or on a group and say, oh, I want to open a virtual dojo, I want to learn a martial art from the video, people will just look at you like, who is this idiot?
Yeah,
You know, you can't learn martial arts from a book.
yeah.
Another big big myth of us, right? Or from a video. It's impossible. You need one-to-one learning. Even mass-produced martial arts such as like Koryu, the Gendai Budo in Japan, this is totally useless. You have to have this personal physical relationship with. And
Mhm.
now everybody is going online. Why? Because, you know, martial arts are also a business, and they have to survive. So on the one hand, we're discovering that, and you know, that opens up new avenues. You know,
Mhm.
people that can go to training, they can still log online even if there's training
Mhm.
you know, going on. Or people from the other side of your state that
Mhm.
doesn't have a karate dojo in their city, they
Yeah.
can still have some karate experience, they can still learn something. And the narrative is changing, the discourse is changing, and you see people that says you can learn martial arts. Now we're saying, well, you kind of can learn martial arts,
You
dude.
kind of bit, yeah.
Just I found a mythical, you know, I discovered this ancient method of online training that was hidden in the cave in China, and there's a temple that teach virtually since 2,000 years ago. I learned from them. Uh, so you have that. I'm not trying to make fun, but that's sort of what's happening, right? So you got these people that are discovering a new way of teaching, and that's amazing. And
Yeah.
if you think about it in terms of survival of some martial arts, or even developing on of new discipline that before that were limited to a village or a city or a particular country.
Mm,
If you wanted to learn whip or stick fighting from Africa, you can't go there. You don't have a place to learn that. But now maybe with a little bit of technology, you can
mm,
sort of start learning it.
mm,
So there's a rediscovery to that. There's great opportunity. On the other side, however, this is going to the detriment of a lot of martial arts. They cannot efficiently teach online.
yeah.
I'm thinking BJJ. Mm, I'm thinking judo.
Mm,
My son was in judo before the pandemic. Was in judo too. I was teaching to the kids. So it was, we have a little dojo going on,
mm.
all friends. And then the pandemic struck and he's not being in a class ever since.
Yeah.
He can't play with a dummy. You can't do all those things. Some martial arts that need physical contacts more than others may be in very deep water
Yeah.
after this pandemic.
Yeah. I've found that with my own narrative over the last 6 months, I thought, okay, there's no training for a little while. So I thought, okay, what do I need for BJJ? I need strength and I need flexibility. So I was in the yoga and I got some more weights and some squat racks and then I bought two dummies, not one but two dummies. And then after a little while of that, I was like, but there's no end in sight. And so it stopped being yoga and weight training for BJJ, and it just became weight training and yoga because they're good. And now it's like I don't even think about it. It seems like an impossible dream at the moment that
Hmm.
I would go back. And at the moment as well, and this is the thing, I've got a nice routine now. Do I? It's like Ben Judkins wrote. It's like people are realizing that they just need a kettlebell and a yoga mat and maybe an internet connection, and you've got all you need. Do
Yep.
you need to go sparring? Do I need it? Why do I need it? I can get highs using the Wim Hof method of breathing. I can get my adrenaline hits from really intense punch bag workouts or something. Do I still need martial arts? So I've been through all sorts of existential crises. I think I do still need martial arts, but like that's because I'm an addict, right? I'm an addict.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, you're striking the most central chord here. With the online experience, at least for now, I mean, there might be some equivalent to that. We're losing all the socialization component or the social component, which let's admit it. Sometimes it's borderline cultish, but
Mm,
that's something we need, we grow into, and the moment you kind of unplug that,
mm,
it's hard to plug it back
mm,
because you fill your life with other things. And that's also true for let's look around and say, okay, let's not talk about martial arts, let's talk about physical
yeah,
activities. you know 24 hours gym, golden gym, plus 5 or 6 more of these big corporation here in the US just filed for bankruptcy.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And because people are not going back,
yeah,
because they say, oh, I was spending $50 a month
yeah,
to go to a gym, and I had to drive there and to pay gas there to stay on a bike and lift some weights.
yeah,
I can buy those weights.
yeah,
You have a backyard or you have a spare room,
yeah,
or a garage, you fill it up with weights and let's say like kettlebells and very basic things. And there are people online that are profiting on that and say, I'm going to tell you, you're not going to go back to gym because I'm going to tell you what you need to
yeah,
do that, and maybe I'll sell you some videos in
yeah.
in the meantime. And that's something that it's sort of happening in some martial arts too.
Yeah, and I think there's certain things that will be able to thrive. Like, so for instance, I've gone back. I mean, I've spent many years punching and kicking things in different styles, and I only recently got into grappling and wrestling styles, and I
Uh-huh.
can't do them. But I just bought a new punch bag,
Yeah.
so I can. So I'm grudgingly going back to pugilism, like and I'm getting a lot from it physically and mentally and emotionally. But so some, that could go online. You can look online and someone can teach you jab, cross, hook, uppercut. You can footwork, timing. And you
Yeah.
have this equipment. So some things will profit from non-contact, even things that are very physical, like boxing and all the
Hmm.
boxercise and Tai Bo and all these things. There'll be like a resurgence of Tai Bo.
Hmm. No, I completely agree with you, and you see it, happening. And when I was mentioned before, those classes that are actually booming, those are mostly striking classes.
Yeah.
Um, and I see with my son, I'm a martial art nerd, and so I'm, being a good parent, I impose my hobbies to my son. That's good parenting, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
yeah. And so, but he likes it, so he's into karate, and I brought it there, and for the whole, first part of the pandemic, when dojo couldn't be open again, or place couldn't be open again, he would do it online.
Hmm.
And then I was talking to his instructor when I brought it back, because he really likes the social component. They say, like, there's a lot of parents that don't want to come back.
Hmm.
They don't care. If for them is nirvana, it's pure heaven. They can put their kid into a room
Yeah,
having 45 minutes training. They don't have to sit there. They don't have to pretend to pay attention. They don't have to drive them over there.
yeah,
So, and with a lot of striking art, they think about somebody that works 9 to 5, and then he wants to go to the gym, and maybe gym is like 7 to 9.
yeah,
I don't want to go there. I don't want to go back home and get ready. When I'm there, it's my couch and my beer. I don't
yeah.
want to go out again. But if you have an online option,
Hmm.
and I don't think this is going away. I think
Yeah.
this is gonna stay around, at least for some arts that were booming.
Yeah.
Grappling arts, wrestlings, on the other hand, they will suffer.
I think so. Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, the BJJ classes have reopened currently in Britain, but there's not much contact. It all has to, any rolling, any actual fighting or sparring has to be really, really either in a bubble or secretly.
Mhm.
And I'm not prepared to do that. But anyway, I mean, so what's next on your agenda? What's the next project? When is the Krav Maga book out, and what's the next?
Hopefully soon enough. I don't want to throw dates around, also because the whole pipeline is jacked by the COVID-19. So everything's got has got roadblocks and stopped at some point. Even collecting data was harder for me because of the lockdown, especially in Israel. People were locked down. They are in lockdown again now, so things are getting a little bit complicated. So
Mm,
this is a big project. And after that, honestly, I don't know. I mean, I got into this COVID-19, so the survival martial arts. But what I would like to do is to continue exploring the political aspects of martial arts. With Ben, we're working on a book proposal for the collection of essays coming mostly from the Chapman University conference, the martial art conference, that specifically talk about politics and martial arts, like from social justice in capoeira,
yeah,
of course, to MMA and white supremacists. That is something that I'm really interested to. By the way, I don't think I have the energy now to get into that, but I think there's a lot to look at into MMA and white supremacists.
I think that is an interesting thing, and we've had conversations about this. There were presentations at the conference about the
Yep.
kind of different sorts of ethnically organized racisms and prejudices around martial arts like MMA, and also some around the historical European martial arts, the kind of like
Mhm.
Viking myth or of Northern European masculinity, right? That all of this kind of stuff. Very
Yeah, but
interesting.
I mean, if you think about it, it's one of the dark side of martial arts, isn't it? And especially those martial arts that have a very strong ethnical and national component. There's quite a lot of racism going on. And of course, MMA, because of the tie that in some way have built between bridges that have been built between some extremist groups and white supremacist groups, and the discipline itself, or HEMA, and the way it was hijacked by let's say nativists
Mm.
group and anti-European Union groups in Europe. But look at Japan, for example. I mean, I'm no expert in China, but I would assume that some of those dynamics and mechanism happen with those martial arts too. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that it's and still are probably some disciplines that are not taught to any foreigners.
Mm.
And the core you was like, oh no, we don't really accept. And of course, well, we can't really understand if you don't really speak Japanese.
Mm.
But the underlying thing is that this is our thing. We
Yeah.
want to preserve it. It's important to us. We don't want it to be diluted by Westerners. We don't want to have Westerners getting in. And
Mm.
even when Westerners are in,
Mm.
there's a different track for them. And historical examples, people in the Goju Ryu karate were disavowed if they were teaching to Americans
Mm.
in Okinawa American militaries. Of course, on the other side, a lot of groups profited
Yeah.
on teaching Westerners. But even there, they were keeping them out. The every decisions or the higher ranks or higher places in the hierarchy. I mean, even today, the Haikikai, which is probably the biggest Aikido organization in the world, there's only a few top rank that are not Japanese.
Mm.
And I don't know if they've changed it. A few years ago, there was this rule that if you want to go above, I think, Godan or something, you have to live in Japan.
Mhm.
So you have to be there. So apparently this is because you need to live the culture and commit yourself to that, blah, 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 blah. But what it is that if you're not Japanese, it's hard for you to get up there.
Mm.
And this is not the same level of racism that you can find of course, in the hammerheads or skinheads group practicing MMA. Of course, it's completely different. But discrimination is in the DNA of, let's say, more than discrimination, this idea of like initiations or progression within the group. It's still something that is in the DNA of I would say most disciplines, especially the ones that are used politically.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we've got all this recorded because I hope that you will follow up on all of the things that you've just been raising now, because I think each and every one of those would be an absolutely compelling article, or even a short article, a short statement of like what the hell is going on, all of these different associations in these different contexts. That would be a wonderful book or collection, or
Yeah.
issue of the journal or something like that. That would, all of these.
No, that will be interesting. It's like, let's put it this way. However, I think I might done something in that sense, but that's something that will burn a lot of bridges. You know what I mean. A lot of people, especially if you are okay. We have this ambiguity in our field, right? We are scholars, and that's our job. That's what we are. But we are also our practitioners, and we are passionate about martial arts. And I think some people might find a little too, let's say, uncomfortable to start writing certain things about their association
Yeah.
when
Well, maybe
when
we
they
should each write an article about what we do know about, and then swap the authorship so that we don't, so that
that's a good idea.
we can
That's a
say,
good idea.
the Japanese
That's a, that's a
martial
now,
artist.
that's a really good idea, honestly, because like I can't write about Aikido. I'm there, but you can write about it, and I'll write about Tai Chi for you.
Exactly.
I mean, these are not heavy things, but I think as you were suggesting, work on all these dark sides of martial art,
Mm.
but practices and organization
Mm.
is really in due time, is overdue, I think. And because what I see a lot of people are that concern themselves with the dark side of martial art, they talk about violence,
Mhm.
and there's a lot to talk about. I'm not denying, but it seems to be the only focus
Yeah.
of people interested in not celebrating martial arts too much, and not being kind of being looking at some of the side effects or again dark side of it. But not a lot of people thought, you know write about, so what are other problems
Mm-hmm.
with martial arts. Well, they do. We know that, at least one of the things we want to explore too with Ben is like, well, they create communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? The martial art discourse create communities, whether that's a local community or, in my case, I'm looking at national communities.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes with a price, right? If I create a national communities, which is all good and beautiful for the people who are in the community,
Mm-hmm.
that automatically exclude other people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So
and it
if
automatically as well, it produces hierarchies and very precise codes and rules, and a privileged group and an underprivileged group, and yeah, it can become quite toxic and
yeah,
dark as well.
correctly. I mean,
I think
yeah,
you've given us the title for this podcast episode on Krav Maga and the dark side of martial arts.
the dark side of martial arts are looking very Star Wars-ish here. No, but I mean, look what happened, like politically speaking. And I hope I'm not touching an open wound here, but what happened with you guys leaving the EU, right? So this affirmation of the British and English identity. You
Mm,
know, when at the when really against and killed the European identity.
mm.
Uh, so
No, it's no, I get it. It's exactly. Well, I'm talking about Brexit and leaving that's like driving off a cliff. So it is an open wound there. We
yeah,
can't talk about that at the moment.
and
But
yeah, there's a lot of reasons why it's an open wound, and and I think among all people, because of your knowledge in identity processes and cultural studies, you appreciate that from an identity construction perspective,
mm,
it's a dramatic
mm,
uh has a dramatic impact.
mhm. Oh yes, not just in terms of identity,
No,
but in very real. And this takes us back to your core discipline, in a very political and economic sense, like hugely consequential for people's lives, not just as identities, but as economic agents and as living beings. We shall see
right,
about that. And
right. I mean, and
we've talked for a while now. I'm sorry, we could talk all night, but
okay. No,
we'll
there's
have
one. There's only one thing that I wanted to add about this, and just to bring history and context back into the picture for a second. And we look back at World War II when we're talking about martial arts, and the role they play into being toxic
mhm,
to identities, or creating these in groups and out groups dynamic. If you look at how with the Japanese invading Korea and the Manchukuo War, one of the things they started to do was to impose their martial arts, right?
mhm,
So teaching kendo and karate to Koreans, and that was sort of like forcing them into becoming good Japanese subjects,
mhm,
not to promote their own identity or their own well-being. And the moment the Japanese went off, they kept those things. They just turn it
mhm.
against, in a sense, against the Japanese.
Yes.
But they turn it into something to create their own identity using those elements. So, and that's Taekwondo comes about, and Kumdo uh, comes about, and especially Kumdo, that has become ever since literally a diplomatic battle
Mm,
between South Korea and Japan. Who is
yeah.
going to be the world champion?
Yeah.
And to the point that they dress differently. It's like, okay, your akama is that, so I'm gonna add a white bar into mine, so they'll make it different. Oh, you had all the ties, okay, I'm gonna add like Velcro straps to mine. uh, I'm gonna make my shinai a little different from yours, just to prove that mine are better, that I'm better than you at your own sport. And so that's, I'll cut it here. As you said,
No, I know. I
we can
love
go
that.
ahead for hours.
The conversation about the kind of fraught semiotic and other cultural battles between the South Koreans and the Japanese in the world of martial arts is just fascinating. And
It's amazing. Yeah,
sitting
I know.
entirely outside of that, it's like watching a game of tennis, isn't it? It's like, but that's probably a really raw nerve for a lot of people. But I do need to call time on this. I'm really sorry.
Of course,
It's
no
been
worries.
fascinating, and we'll talk again soon. But we'll do another podcast, I guess, when your book comes out. But for
Sure.
now, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for the conversation. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this.